On our wedding night, my new wife, Isabella Vance, daughter of the powerful Senator Alistair Vance, held a poisoned stiletto to my throat. "I would rather die than let you touch me," she hissed. "My body is for Julian. Marrying you is just a political move by my father." I laughed. I wrenched the blade from her grip and, without hesitation, plunged it through her shoulder, pinning her to the ornate headboard. I twisted the blade, severing the tendons in her arm. The next day, I dragged her like a dog into the heart of the Capitol. In front of the entire Senate Assembly and her own father, I read her private, encrypted messages with her beloved Julian, one by one. The president, watching from the gallery, erupted in fury. He ordered the immediate seizure of all her family's assets. Before the final blow fell, I took her to a secure room. I made her watch a live feed as her precious Julian was cornered and executed by cartel hitmen. I leaned in, my lips brushing her ear. "Don't worry, your father is next," I whispered. "And you? You'll watch the whole show from my bedroom." The flame of a thick wedding candle sputtered, casting dancing shadows across Isabella's face, a beautiful mask twisted by pure rage. The jeweled stiletto in her hand glinted with a faint, oily sheen, aimed directly at my throat. "Alexander Thorne, you goddamn brute. Did you really think I'd just marry you?" she seethed. "My father said you're nothing but a dog on a short leash." I looked at her like she was a spoiled child throwing a tantrum. With a single, fluid motion, I disarmed her. Her shock was fleeting. A second later, the stiletto sank deep into her shoulder, severing the tendons with a sickening crunch. "Ah!" A piercing scream shattered the quiet of our wedding night. Blood instantly blossomed across the fabric of her $1,000 gown. She collapsed to the floor, her right arm hanging limp and useless. I crouched, grabbing her chin, forcing her to look at the mangled wound. "A political move?" I sneered. "Well, now your life is my political move." She trembled violently, pain and cold sweat plastering her hair to her forehead, but her pride held. My father will destroy you for this." "Will he?" I rose to my feet and called out, "Bring me the saline solution." Two stern-faced maids entered with a basin of concentrated salt water, not even glancing at the woman bleeding on the floor. I took a ladle, scooped up the liquid, and poured it directly onto her open wound. A sharp sizzle, the sound of flesh being chemically burned, filled the air. Her scream turned into a raw, agonized shriek as her body convulsed. "Your father sent you to me like a lamb to the slaughter," I said, tossing the ladle back into the basin. The splash hit her square in the face. "He gambled that I wouldn't dare touch his precious daughter. He lost." I reached into the bodice of her ruined dress and pulled out the slim smartphone she had hidden there. I unlocked it and opened her encrypted messages. As she whimpered in agony, I began to read. "Julian, my love, I had to see that animal Alexander Thorne again today. He's so crude. The sight of him makes me sick. Julian, father is making me marry him. My heart is breaking. I can only ever be yours. Julian, my love, once you pass the bar, father will help us. We'll ruin Thorne, and I swear I'll have him torn to pieces." Her defiance melted into terror, then into complete, hopeless despair. Stop reading," she cried, trying to crawl toward me to cover my mouth. I kicked her away. "Please," she begged, her forehead pressed against the cold marble floor. "Just kill me." I looked down at her. Death is too easy. The show is just getting started. I had my staff tie her to the bedpost, forcing her eyes open so she could watch me sleep soundly in the bed she so despised. She didn't close her eyes once all night. She had no tears left to cry, only a mixture of blood and sweat tracking down her face. When morning came, I got up and personally dressed her in a coarse, drab jumpsuit. Then, I grabbed her by the hair and dragged her from the master's suite like she was nothing more than a carcass. The household staff knelt as we passed, their heads bowed low, their bodies trembling with fear. This was the first crack in the flawless facade of the great senator's daughter. On the Senate floor, the powerful men and women of the nation stood in somber attendance. I kicked Isabella, sending her sprawling into the center of the room. She let out a muffled groan as her body hit the cold marble, her useless right hand curling into a broken claw. "Mr. Thorne, what is the meaning of this?" the president demanded from his seat of honor, his performance of surprise perfectly timed. Isabella's father, Senator Alistair Vance, saw the pathetic state of the woman on the floor. His face went rigid with fury. "Isabella," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Thorne, what have you done to my daughter?" I ignored him, addressing only the president. "Mr. President, I have been grievously wronged. On my wedding night, Senator Vance's daughter, not only attempted to assassinate me with a poisoned blade, but she also informed me that her marriage to me was nothing more than a political sham to consolidate her father's power. An uproar swept through the chamber. Senator Vance was shaking with rage. Lies. My daughter is a gentle, well-bred woman. She would never do such a thing. This is slander from a low-born thug. Slander? I held up the phone. Senator, would you care to hear your daughter's private correspondence with her cousin, Julian Croft? I began to read, my voice booming through the chamber sound system. I read everything, from her childhood promises to their detailed plans to cuckold me after the wedding. I read their scheme to use the senator's influence to destroy my career once Julian became a lawyer. The explicit declarations of love, the vicious curses, every word echoed off the marble walls. The color drained from Senator Vance's face. His political rivals, smelling blood in the water, immediately seized the opportunity. He can't even control his own daughter, a moral disgrace. To marry such a woman to a decorated patriot like Mr. Thorne is an insult to this nation. Vance tried to argue, but I was already presenting my second piece of evidence, a forged dossier detailing his secret communications with a hostile foreign cartel. The documents proved Vance had promised to leak critical intelligence in exchange for their support in his bid for higher office. The president took the file, his face a mask of theatrical fury as he slammed it down. Alistair Vance, you traitor, he bellowed. I have shown you nothing but favor, and you repay this country with treason? The president's roar was the final nail in the coffin. The senator's allies scrambled to distance themselves, falling over each other to condemn him. Alistair Vance collapsed, finally understanding that this was a perfectly executed coup against him. And the trigger, the architect of his downfall, was his own beloved daughter. He turned his head, his gaze locking onto Isabella. There was no longer any trace of fatherly love in his eyes. There was only a cold, venomous hatred. He looked at her as if she were the monster who had single-handedly destroyed his world. Under that poisonous glare, Isabella shattered completely. She couldn't understand how, in the span of a single night, her entire world had been set on fire. Dad, Daddy, she mumbled, reaching out with her good hand, grasping at nothing. The president's voice rang out, cold as steel. I hereby order the immediate arrest of Senator Alistair Vance for treason and conspiracy against the state. His associates will be detained for investigation. His assets are to be seized, effective immediately. He paused, his eyes landing on me. As for Isabella Vance, she will be placed in the custody of Mr. Thorne, to be dealt with as he sees fit. It was done. I walked over to Isabella, grabbed her by the collar of her jumpsuit, and hauled her to her feet. I whispered into her ear, a secret just for the two of us. See, that's the powerful father you were so proud of. Right now, I bet he wishes he could kill you with his own two hands. We were in a darkened suite overlooking a five-star hotel's press ballroom. Isabella was tied to a chair, a gag in her mouth, her eyes forced to stare at the screen below, where her world was being publicly dismantled. The first feed switched on. It was him, her beloved Julian Croft, a soft, privileged lawyer in training, now a terrified, blubbering mess, a dark stain spreading across the front of his pants. He was on his knees in some grimy warehouse. He looked up at the camera and saw the feed of Isabella watching him. A raw, primal hatred erupted from him. Isabella, you bitch, you did this to me. You and your bastard father ruined me, he screamed, spitting every vile word he could think of. Isabella's body convulsed, silent sobs racking her frame. I gestured to a guard, who tightened her gag until even her whimpers were muffled. Quiet now. Watch closely, I said, calmly pouring her a glass of water. The feed became a live-streamed execution. The cartel's methods were brutal, efficient. The first cut was precise, methodical. Julian's scream was barely human. I held the glass to Isabella's lips, murmuring a soft commentary in her ear. That first one is just to get his attention. They'll take their time. They want to make sure the message is received. It's not about the blood, you see. It's about the pain. Her body began to shake uncontrollably, a low, retching sound caught in her throat. She tried to close her eyes, but I held her chin, forcing her to watch. Don't miss a moment. This is the last drama your lover will ever perform for you. The flashes of violence continued. Julian's curses faded to weak moans, then to silence. Isabella finally couldn't take it anymore and passed out. I picked up the glass of ice water and threw it in her face. She gasped, jolting awake, her eyes forced back to the horrific scene on the screen. I don't know how much time passed before Julian was just a broken thing on a concrete floor. Isabella's eyes were vacant, glazed over. But it wasn't over. The second feed flickered to life. It was her father, Senator Alistair Vance, in a prison holding cell. The once proud and powerful man was now gone, his face a mask of feral despair. Two larger inmates cornered him. He looked up at the hidden camera, and somehow he knew we were watching. He didn't curse. He just stared, his eyes boring into his daughter through the screen. His look was 100 times more toxic than Julian's screams. Just before the inmates' shivs began their work, he gathered all his strength and spat a mouthful of bloody saliva at the camera lens. The screen went red. I finally untied the ropes binding Isabella. She slumped to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut. A moment later, she let out a piercing shriek and scrambled toward the window, trying to throw herself out. I grabbed a fistful of her hair and hauled her back. I leaned in close, repeating the line I'd used before, a final curtain call for the evening's performance. I told you your father was next, and you got to watch the whole show from my place. I paused, savoring the utter void in her eyes. Oh, and I forgot to mention, your entire family, all their allies, all their wealth. It's all gone. You are the sole survivor. Because your life is my plaything. Her eyes were empty, reflecting nothing. She was a doll with the soul ripped out. The most remote wing of the Thorne estate was the servants' quarters. Isabella was thrown into the filthiest room, shared with 3 elderly groundskeepers. The once untouchable heiress was now the lowest of the low. Her daily work consisted of mucking out the stables, scrubbing toilets, and hauling everyone's garbage. Her crippled right hand could barely hold a brush. If she was too slow, the overseer's cane would lash across her back. Useless trash. This estate doesn't shelter freeloaders. Her body was soon covered in fresh bruises. She had tried to resist once. The result was 3 days without food, leaving her so weak she couldn't even stand. She tried to die. She slammed her head against a wall, but was pulled away. She tried to drown herself in a fountain, but there were guards posted 24/7. I had given a standing order. If she died, everyone assigned to watch her would die with her. She didn't even have the right to her own death. One day, I assembled the entire staff. In front of everyone, I made an announcement. From this day forward, Kira Frost will be the chief steward of this estate. She has authority over all household matters. Kira stepped out from the crowd and gave me a respectful nod. She was my inside agent, the chess piece I had planted in the Vance household years ago. She was cool, intelligent, and fiercely loyal. Everyone knelt to the new boss, except Isabella. She just stood there dazed. Kira walked up to her, her voice flat. "Kneel." Isabella didn't move, just stared with those hollow eyes. Kira lifted her foot, the toe of her expensive, custom-made shoe stopping just inches from Isabella's face. "My shoe is dirty. Clean it." A tremor of humiliation ran through Isabella's body. But in the end, she slowly, painfully knelt. She reached out with her trembling right hand, using her tattered sleeve to wipe the spotless leather. Because of the severed tendons, her movements were clumsy, pathetic. Instead of cleaning it, she smeared a bit of mud onto the toe. Kira watched, her expression unchanging. The next second, she kicked out, her heel striking Isabella square in the chest. Isabella flew backward, landing hard and coughing up a mouthful of blood. The other servants stood frozen in silence. I watched it all from the veranda, a faint smile of approval on my face. Then, I turned to Kira. "Come to my study." I left with Kira, leaving Isabella to struggle back to her feet under the contemptuous gaze of the entire staff. Late that night, I deliberately left the door to my study open. Inside, Kira and I discussed how to liquidate the assets seized from the Vance family. Those commercial properties downtown can be sold to the Lee Consortium. That'll free up a lot of capital for our security upgrades. The vineyard out east is profitable. We'll absorb it directly into the Thorne portfolio. And all those rare books and paintings in Vance's private library. Burn them. I don't want any trace of him left. My voice wasn't loud, but it was clear enough for Isabella, who was kneeling on the cold floor outside, tasked with serving tea she was never asked for. She knelt there, her body shaking like a leaf in an autumn wind. She was finally beginning to understand. I didn't just want her family dead and broken. I wanted their entire legacy erased from the earth, burned to ash. When I walked out of the study, she looked up at me sharply. That look in her eyes was no longer simple hatred. It was now laced with a thick, paralyzing fear. She was starting to be afraid of me. Good. Fear is the most effective tool for breaking an animal. Isabella stopped fighting. She began to do her work in silence. Beatings, starvation, she endured it all without a sound. She was like a beast of burden, all sharp edges worn smooth. Occasionally, I would make a point of being kind to Kira in front of her. "It's getting cold. You should wear something warmer," I'd say, personally draping a cashmere shawl over Kira's shoulders. In a far corner of the courtyard, Isabella, scrubbing a toilet, would see this. Her hands would pause for a fraction of a second, a flicker of something sharp and painful in her eyes. She began to secretly try to please me. Hearing from someone that I liked a particular type of pastry, she stole flour and sugar from the kitchen to make them. But her crippled hand wouldn't obey, and what she produced was a burnt, lumpy mess. The head chef found her, beat her soundly for the theft, and threw her pathetic offering into the pig slop. One time, I was sparring with a guard and got a small cut on my forearm. When I returned to the main house, she was carrying out a bucket of dirty water. Seeing the blood on my arm, she looked like she'd lost her mind. She dropped the bucket and scrambled toward me. "Sir, you're hurt," she stammered, reaching for my arm with her filthy, broken hands. I kicked her away. The force of it sent her rolling across the ground. I took out a silk handkerchief, wiped the spot on my sleeve where she'd almost touched me, and threw it on the ground in disgust. "Anything touched by that hand of yours just makes me feel dirty." My words hurt more than the kick. She lay on the ground for a long time, but she didn't give up. She started studying my habits. A basin of perfectly heated water would be waiting by the door when I returned, though I never used it. When I was reading, she would beg for the privilege of waiting outside the door, kneeling silently, ready to pour tea, though I always threw it on the floor and made her clean it up. Her attempts to please me were clumsy, pathetic, and utterly laughable. I ignored them, or worse, used them as opportunities for further humiliation. And yet, the way she looked at me began to change. One night, I saw her sneak into the training yard. She picked up a towel I had used to wipe off sweat earlier that day and had carelessly tossed aside. It was covered in my sweat and grime. She clutched it like a holy relic, hiding it in her shirt before scurrying back to the servants' quarters. I stood in the shadows, struck by the sheer absurdity of it all. She was starting to rationalize, to rewrite the past. She remembered a long time ago, at a crowded festival, when she'd been separated from her parents and nearly trampled by a spooked police horse. I had been the one to pull her to safety. She remembered the first time she saw me, after our engagement was announced, the intense, unsettling way I had looked at her. She was reinterpreting it all as a sign that I had once loved her, that all this cruelty was just love that had curdled into hate. The look in her eyes morphed from pure fear to something far more complex. It was a mixture of humility, supplication, and a sliver of twisted, pathological adoration. A perfect victim of Stockholm Syndrome was born. The first snow of winter fell on the city. I returned to my suite late, half drunk from a political dinner. I pushed open the door and was met with a gust of cold, fragrant air. A figure was kneeling by my bed. It was Isabella. She had shed her filthy servant's clothes and was wearing only a thin, silk slip. Moonlight filtered through the window, illuminating her shivering body. "Alexander," she whispered, lifting her head. Her cheeks were flushed with an unnatural heat. I am your wife." Her hands trembled as she reached for the straps of her slip. "Please, take me." The alcohol buzz vanished. I stared at her body, trembling from cold and fear, and I laughed. I walked over and stood before her, looking down. "My wife?" I asked. "I thought your body was reserved for your dead lover." The color drained from her face. She shook her head frantically, tears welling in her eyes. No. There's no one else now. Only you. Please, have mercy on me." She crawled forward, trying to embrace my legs. I stepped back, avoiding her touch. I turned and took a heavy, fur-lined coat from its stand. A flicker of hope sparked in her eyes. She thought it was for her. Instead, I slowly, deliberately draped it over my own shoulders. The contrast between my warmth and her exposed, shivering form was grotesquely theatrical. Then I crouched down, gripping her ice-cold face. I spoke each word clearly, precisely. "The way you are right now, you wouldn't even be good enough for the dogs I keep on this estate." The light in her eyes died. I let her go, stood up, and brushed imaginary dust from my coat. "Kira," I called toward the door. Kira entered instantly, holding a lantern. "Drag this shameless thing outside," I said, pointing at the half-naked woman on the floor. "Throw her in the courtyard. Let her kneel in the snow all night. Maybe they'll clear her head." Kira showed no surprise. "Yes, sir," she said, and moved to grab Isabella's arm, preparing to drag her out like a sack of garbage. Isabella didn't resist. She was a broken doll, limp and unresponsive. Her slip fell away as she was dragged, exposing the bruised, pale skin of her back. The door closed. I could hear Kira's cold voice in the hall. "Kneel properly." That night, the snow fell heavily. Isabella knelt in the courtyard until dawn. Her heart, along with her body, froze solid. Every pathetic fantasy, every twisted strand of affection she had manufactured was shattered by my own hand in the freezing snow. My political campaign in the western states was a resounding success. I returned to D.C., triumphant. At the victory celebration, the president was ecstatic, publicly appointing me to a new cabinet-level position, a de facto regent with unprecedented power. After a few rounds of drinks, the president spoke with a calculated smile. The regent has served this country tirelessly, and yet his house has no matriarch. This is not right. He gestured to the young woman beside him. My sister, Claire Hamilton, is a virtuous and gentle woman of 18. I would like to offer her hand to you in marriage. What do you say, Mr. Thorne? The hall fell silent. Claire was the president's most cherished family member. Marrying her to me was the ultimate political offering, a gesture of alliance and appeasement. I rose from my seat and bowed. I accept, Mr. President. The news that I was to marry the president's sister spread through D.C. like wildfire. It also reached the Thorne estate. The staff began to whisper, "The master is getting a new wife. Looks like Isabella Vance's days are numbered." Of course, what proper wife would tolerate that disgraced traitor living under the same roof? She'll be lucky if they just throw her out. They'll probably beat her to death and dump the body. These words reached Isabella's ears. She was washing laundry in the icy river that ran through the estate. When she heard the news, her hands trembled so badly that she lost her balance and fell into the freezing water. When they pulled her out, she was soaked to the bone, her face as white as a sheet. She knew the servants were right. A new mistress would never allow her to live. She was going to die. The thought hung over her head like a guillotine. She bolted from the back of the estate, running wildly until she reached my study. The guard stopped her. She screamed from the other side of the door, raw, desperate sound. "Sir, Mr. Thorne, please, I have to see you." I was reading, and the noise made me frown. Kira asked, "Shall I have her removed?" "Let her in," I said, putting down my book. I was curious to see what new drama this was. She burst in, dripping water, a complete mess. She fell to her knees with a loud thud, clinging to my legs. "Sir, please don't kill me," she sobbed, her words choked and desperate. Her forehead was pressed against my expensive leather shoes. "I'll do anything. I'll be your slave, your dog, anything. Just let me stay here. Don't send me away, don't kill me." This was the first time she had so plainly expressed her will to live, her dependence on me. I looked at her terrified face and was suddenly amused. I bent down and tilted her face up. "Who said anything about killing you?" I asked, feigning surprise. "Claire is a kind woman. I'm sure she'll grant you a quick, painless death." Isabella broke completely. She began banging her head on the floor, over and over, with all her might. Soon, a smear of blood stained the polished hardwood. "Sir, please." I said nothing more, letting her kneel there, marinating in the absolute terror of her impending death. Claire Hamilton's family began sending engagement gifts to the estate. Gilded chests and boxes arrived daily, wrapped in celebratory silks that stung the eyes. Each gift was like a death warrant, hammering another nail into Isabella's coffin. She grew thinner by the day, the fear in her eyes becoming a permanent fixture. When she looked at me, it was as if I were her one and only savior. The night before my wedding to Claire, the estate was alive with celebration. Isabella was locked in a storage shed, her face ashen, awaiting her fate. Late that night, I dismissed my staff and went to the shed alone. I opened the door. "Come with me." Her body went stiff. She thought this was the end. She didn't resist, just followed me obediently through the winding corridors to a secret room deep within the estate. I pushed the door open. Inside, there were no instruments of torture. There was only a wall, lined with rows upon rows of framed photographs. Hundreds of them. In the flickering candlelight, I could see that every man, woman, and child in the photos shared a common heritage. They were all members of the same family. They were all Sterlings. Isabella stared, confused. I walked to the memorial, lit 3 sticks of incense, and knelt in a solemn bow. "Your unworthy son, Alexander Sterling, has finally avenged our family," I said, my voice echoing in the silent chamber. Isabella looked as if she'd been struck by lightning. I stood and turned to face her. 10 years ago, the Sterling family was one of the most respected in this city. Overnight, they were systematically destroyed, every last one of them. My voice was calm, conversational. "The man responsible was your father, Alistair Vance. He framed my father for treason, fabricated evidence, and conspired with his allies to have my entire family, over 300 of them, arrested, bankrupted, and ultimately killed. I was only 15 at the time, away at a boarding school overseas. I was the only one who survived. I stepped closer to her, my gaze like a razor. I changed my name. I joined the military. I clawed my way up from nothing to where I am today. It took me 10 years. So, do you understand now? Her lips trembled, her face a deathly white. Marrying you wasn't a political move, I continued. It was about getting my hands on the sharpest knife I could find to plunge into your father's heart. Your affair with your cousin, your father's ambitions, his network of corrupt allies. I knew it all. I've been waiting for this day for a decade. The truth hit her with the force of a physical blow, slicing her to ribbons. Her family's ruin, her own humiliation and degradation, her pathetic, twisted love. It was all a lie, all part of my design. She was nothing but the perfect pawn in my game of revenge. Why? She stammered, pointing a trembling finger at me. Why me? I laughed, a deep, satisfying laugh of absolute victory. Because, on the day my family's assets were seized, your father brought you to the courthouse. He held you in his arms, this perfect little porcelain doll, and he pointed at me, a grieving boy in rags, and he said, "Look, that is the difference between dirt and diamonds. Between you and him." I swore an oath that day, I said, looking down at her crumpled form. I swore that one day, I would take his precious diamond and drag it through the filthiest mud I could find. I watched her face crumble into a mask of utter devastation, and I delivered the final, killing blow. I never loved you. I never even hated you. Because you, Isabella, were never important enough for either. She collapsed, a silent scream trapped in her throat. Her entire existence, the epic tragedy of love and hate she had constructed in her mind, was, from beginning to end, a joke. On the day of the wedding, the music was deafening. I stood at the altar in a custom tuxedo. Below me sat the nation's elite. Isabella was locked in the memorial room, able to hear every celebratory note, each one a mockery of her own stupidity. The time came. Claire Hamilton, radiant in her designer gown, walked toward me, escorted by the president himself. She lowered her head demurely, ready to begin the ceremony. At that moment, I raised the ceremonial glass of wine for the toast, and then I smashed it on the floor. It was the signal. Instantly, armed soldiers, my soldiers, poured in from every entrance, weapons raised, securing the venue in seconds. The music died. Screams erupted from the guests. The president and his sister stared, their faces draining of color. "Thorne, what is this?" "This is treason," the president shrieked, his voice cracking with fear. I smiled and pulled a file from my jacket. "Mr. President, this file contains proof that you have been secretly working with Senator Vance's remaining loyalists to strip me of my authority. You made the first move." I tossed the file at his feet. "Now you have two choices. 1, you sign this letter of resignation and live out your days quietly as a private citizen. 2, I send you to whatever hell your friend Alistair Vance is currently in." The president looked at the sea of guns pointed at him, then at the faces of the soldiers who answered only to me. He knew he had lost. He slumped into his chair, and with a trembling hand, he took the pen offered to him. The resignation was signed. I didn't kill him. I had him and his terrified sister escorted back to the White House, where they would live out their days under permanent house arrest. I, Alexander Sterling Thorne, was the new master of this country. I took off the ridiculous tuxedo and changed into a simple, perfectly tailored black suit that felt more like armor. Kira went to the memorial room and calmly explained to Isabella what had happened. Isabella, leaning against the cold wall of photos, didn't react. She finally understood. I had no feelings for Claire Hamilton, either. Every woman, in my eyes, was just a chess piece. A piece to be used for revenge or for power, and once used, to be discarded. I walked into the memorial room, wearing the mantle of my new power. She looked up at me. The eyes that had once burned with so much love and hate were now placid. There was nothing left in them but a vast, empty silence. My revenge was complete. I held all the power. I looked at this withered, broken woman, the final piece in my decade-long game, and I felt bored. The game was over. "Do you have anything to say?" I asked her. She was silent for so long, I thought she wouldn't answer. Then, she lifted her head and asked in a flat, monotone voice, "Can I burn something for my family?" I was surprised. I had expected curses, begging, more tears. But not this. Fine, I agreed. It was the last shred of dignity I could offer her. Kira brought a metal basin and a small box of Isabella's family photos and letters. Isabella knelt, and one by one, she fed the memories of her past into the fire. Her movements were slow, hampered by her crippled right hand. The firelight played across the calm, blank canvas of her face. As the pictures turned to ash, I told her my decision. Tomorrow, you will be taken from the city. You're being sent to a private facility in Alaska. You will never be allowed to leave. The Alaskan North, the harshest, most desolate part of my country. A place of endless winter and crushing isolation. Exiling her there, letting her rot in obscurity, was a fate far crueler than a simple death. Her hand paused over the fire for a moment. Then, she turned to me and bowed her head to the floor. There were no tears, no pleas. Thank you, Mr. President, for sparing my life. It was the first time she had used such a formal, distant title. Mr. President. I looked at her unervingly calm face and felt the boredom deepen. The toy was completely broken. There wasn't even a final struggle left in her. I turned to leave. Kira followed me out, asking in a low voice, "Sir, should I arrange for an accident on the way? To make sure she doesn't become a loose end?" I didn't break my stride. No, let her live. Let her live out her days on the land that I now rule. Let her watch, from her frozen prison, as the son of the family her father destroyed builds a new dynasty. Let her see the sterling legacy rise and last for 1,000 years. For her, that is a torment far greater than death. I walked out of the memorial and never looked back. The Alaskan blizzards would do the work for me, burying the last traces of her existence. A year later, the government was stable, the nation was prosperous. I had formally assumed the presidency. I had married Kira, and she was now the First Lady. Our son was 6 months old, a chubby, happy baby who rarely cried. I was holding him on a couch in the Oval Office, enjoying a rare moment of peace. Kira sat beside me, peeling an orange, her face soft with contentment. Suddenly, an aide burst in. "Sir," an urgent, eyes-only intelligence brief from the Northern Command. I handed the baby to Kira and took the sealed envelope. Inside were 2 documents. One was a standard intelligence report from the commander in Alaska outlining regional threats. The other was a crude, makeshift letter folded from a piece of rough paper bag. I opened it. The handwriting was jagged and uneven, the letters pressed so hard into the paper that it had nearly torn through. It was clear the author had written it with excruciating effort. It was from Isabella. The note was short, but its contents were staggering. She described, in meticulous detail, unusual movements of personnel and supplies she had observed at a nearby airfield used by the cartel I had crippled but not yet destroyed. She had identified staging areas, analyzed flight patterns, and predicted their most likely route for a retaliatory strike against domestic oil pipelines. Her analysis was 100 times more detailed and 1,000 times more vital than the vague chatter mentioned in the official report. This was her way of proving her value. Or perhaps it was her final goodbye. Kira, sitting beside me, saw the letter and the signature. Her expression flickered for a fraction of a second, but she said nothing, simply holding out a slice of orange for me. My face remained a mask of indifference. My thumb stroked the rough paper, feeling the deep grooves of her handwriting. At the very end of the letter was a final sentence. The script was even more chaotic, as if written with the last ounce of her strength. "May God grant my president a long and prosperous reign." I was silent for a moment. Then I folded the note and put it back in the envelope. "Alexander," Kira prompted softly. I came back to myself, opening my mouth to accept the orange slice she offered. It was very sweet. "It's nothing," I said coolly. "Just some low-level thugs making noise." I acted on Isabella's intelligence. Or rather, I acted on a top-secret, high-level asset report from an anonymous source in the Northern Command. I set a trap along the cartel's predicted route, turning their own plan against them. The operation was a flawless success. The enemy force was annihilated. Their leader was captured alive, and the cartel's entire network collapsed within weeks. The threat from the south was permanently neutralized. When the news broke, the nation celebrated. At the formal dinner, my cabinet members and generals showered me with praise. I sat at the head of the table, the undisputed master of my domain, accepting their adulation. Late that night, I returned to our private residence. Kira was there, waiting to help me undress. As she unfastened my cufflinks, she asked in a soft, almost casual voice, "The commander of the Northern Command deserves great credit for this victory, my love." She paused. "Should we also reward the source?" From an inner pocket of my suit, I withdrew the crumpled note I had kept for months. Kira's breath hitched almost silently. I walked over to the fireplace where a low fire burned. The flames cast shifting shadows on my face. I looked at the note in my hand, feeling no desire to even read it again. Casually, I tossed it into the fire. The flames leaped up, instantly consuming the ugly, painstaking script. The paper curled, blackened, and disintegrated into a wisp of smoke that vanished up the chimney. I turned to Kira. The Northern commander has been promoted and will receive a commendation and a significant bonus. I walked to her and took her hands in mine. They were warm. As for irrelevant people, I said, looking into her eyes, which held nothing but complete trust and adoration, we will not speak of them again. I gave her a genuine smile. This world is a very large place, but all I need of it is you and our son. Outside the window, the moon hung high and bright in the sky. The snows of Alaska, the galas of Washington, D.C., none of it had anything to do with a woman named Isabella Vance anymore. My revenge was complete. My life had turned a new page. Her remorse, her love, her life, her death. To me, they were nothing more than a scrap of paper burned in a fire. And once burned, there is nothing left.